well, I'm speaking for myself here. I assume I'm speaking for others when I say that addiction is kind of an issue with coffee, or dependency, or whatever word you decide to use. There's a very interesting article on Precision Nutrition, which is a great website. I'll put the link at the bottom. It's called How Coffee Affects Your Hormones, and I'm going to read an excerpt from that. Chronic caffeine intake also increases the sensitivity of serotonin receptors. In other words, receptors specific to serotonin are more responsive to serotonin present in the synaptic cleft. It's sort of like installing a bigger satellite dish to catch more of an existing signal. One study showed a decrease in serotonin release, but an increase in serotonin reuptake, leading to an overall increase in serotonin levels. Think of it as the brain's natural recycling. In the human body, when neurotransmitter receptors increase in number, or if they increase their sensitivity, it generally suggests a reduction in functional capacity and activity of neurons associated with those receptors. Either the brain needs more chemicals to do the job, or the neurons involved aren't working as hard. Now, this might mean that a certain neurotransmitter is in short supply, or that its activity needs to increase. In the case of caffeine and serotonin, this can partly explain the mood-enhancing effects of drinking coffee. Caffeine has also been shown to increase serotonin levels in the limbic system, a relatively primitive part of our brain involved in regulating basic functions like hormonal secretions, emotional response, mood regulation, and pain-pleasure sensations. So this has a similar mode of action as some antidepressant medications. The increase in serotonin levels combined with the increase in serotonin receptors cause the characteristic withdrawal symptoms, agitation, irritability, and so on, when coffee intake is stopped. The brain has come to expect more action in its serotonin receptors, and when its abundant supply of happy chemicals is abruptly cut off, it gets crabby. Indirectly, chronic caffeine intake may impact neurochemistry by reducing cofactors, chemical partners, necessary for neurotransmitter synthesis. For example, coffee inhibits the absorption of iron, a key mineral involved in the synthesis of serotonin and dopamine. Additionally, we need the activated forms of vitamin B6 to synthesize serotonin, dopamine, and GABA. Coffee consumption can decrease amounts of circulating B vitamins, which could affect neurotransmitter synthesis in another way. Thus, caffeine impacts whether certain chemicals are available, how receptive our brains are to them, and whether we're even making those chemicals in the first place. So, that's very, very interesting. So, a couple of other things from this article as well. Caffeine has a huge effect on the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis, or the HPA axis, makes it a little easier. This system links the hypothalamus and pituitary glands in the brain and also the adrenal glands. Now, the HPA axis influences the body's ability to manage and deal with stress, both at rest and also during activity. The adrenal glands secrete two very, very key hormones, epinephrine and cortisol. I'm sure you've probably heard bits and pieces about these. Epinephrine, or adrenaline, increases respiration rate, heart rate, blood pressure, while cortisol frees up stored glucose, which we tend to need in greater amounts during times of stress or perceived stress. So, for our early ancestors, the ability to quickly access and use stored energy was obviously quite helpful. This is a great acute response to an immediate stress, something like being chased by a bear. But it's quite a damaging response when the stress is chronic. For example, the demands of daily modern life. Now, human studies have shown that caffeine increases cortisol and epinephrine at rest, and that levels of cortisol after caffeine consumption are actually similar to those experienced during acute stress. So in other words, drinking coffee recreates stress conditions for the body. Also consider the fact people tend to consume caffeine during stressful periods. Students studying for tests, or people at work in a stressful office or work environment. And this can potentially make things a hell of a lot worse. Rat studies have shown that caffeine consumption during chronic stress increased cortisol, blood pressure, and other negative hormonal events. Chronically stressed rats who also consumed caffeine ended up sicker and they died sooner than the rats experiencing chronic stress without caffeine consumption. I mean, remember as well, though, that chronic caffeine consumption does lead to a bit of a tolerance, a physiological tolerance. So factors, things like blood pressure, heart rate, excessive urination, epinephrine production, even anxiety and the stimulative effects may not be as strongly affected in regular coffee drinkers, but it's definitely a factor to consider. There's one final small section I'd like to read from the article. I mean, I definitely recommend reading through it because it's very, very interesting. I'll just do one little section from it. Chronic coffee consumption increases insulin resistance, a situation in the body where it cannot effectively deliver glucose into the cells of the body. In this situation, insulin, which helps transport glucose into the cells, cannot do its job well because the body's cells are less receptive. This typically occurs with a diet high in refined sugars and starches. Thus, the body must release ever larger amounts of insulin to do the job. Like parents tuning out their screaming toddler, the body becomes less and less sensitive to insulin's effects, which means more circulating glucose, which means more insulin response. Insulin release, and so on. It's a vicious cycle, and unfortunately it's a cycle that currently occurs in the majority of North Americans. Combine the standard Western diet, high in refined carbohydrates, with stress and a high caffeine intake, and you have a potential recipe for metabolic disaster. As I say, the article goes on, so I'll put a link at the bottom. Give it a, check it out. It's good stuff. Okay, right. I could talk about coffee all day. This video is already dragged into 2 parts, and I really didn't intend for this to happen. I really need to practice cutting these shorter. So I'm going to finish up with a few final tidbits of information. Now, darker roasts are generally smoother. They have less fiber content and a more kind of sugary flavour. They actually have less caffeine. Now, lighter roasts have more caffeine and a stronger flavour from the oils and acids that are actually destroyed during the longer roasting periods that results in the darker roast. A small amount of chaff is produced during roasting from the skin left on the bean after processing. The chaff is usually removed from the beans by air movement, although a small amount is added to dark roast coffees to soak up oils in the beans. Now, there's an interesting coffee tasting technique called cupping, which is used to evaluate coffee aroma and also the flavour profile. This is something from the website coffeeresearch.org. Cupping is one of the coffee tasting techniques used by cuppers to evaluate coffee aroma and the flavour profile of the coffee. To understand the minor differences between coffee growing regions, it is important to taste coffee from around the world side by side. Cupping is also used to evaluate a defective coffee or create coffee blends. In a coffee cupping session, the table is usually set up with 6 to 10 cups per coffee. These are fashioned in a triangular manner. At the top of this triangle, you should place a sample of the roasted coffee and a sample of the green coffee. In the centre of the table, place a cup of room temperature water and an empty cup containing the cupping spoons. Cover both the green sample and roasted sample until the cupping session is over and the coffee aroma, fragrance and flavour profile have been documented. After this time, the coffee samples could be uncovered and additional comments can be written based on appearance. This method will help reduce the common eye cupping technique. Okay, this video has gone way over what I originally intended, so I'm going to cut it short here. I just want to say a very special thank you to Mr. Tom Taylor for designing the opening image for me, the Bangs Fitness splash image, so that's really cool. Mucho apreciado, and I'll catch you next time.
Coffee. I bet you can't eat the coffee.
Why should I want to eat the coffee?
Eat the coffee.
No.
You can't eat it, can you?
I probably could.
So
yeah.
eat it.
No, you eat the coffee.
All right, I'll eat it.
Yeah, go on then.